maybe we should all quit. Hey everyone, Jake here from Monsters Munchkins, and I'm as behind on watching YouTube videos as I am on filming them. I just recently watched Cody from Taking 20's video on the illusion of choice and all of those other things that is making him switch from Pathfinder 2nd Edition to D&D 5th Edition. Now, I can't say I like Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I don't actually like Pathfinder. I do like D&D, and 5th Edition is what I've been playing for, what did it come out, 2016? So we're going on however many years it's been out for. Now, I've nowhere near the reach that Cody's channel does. I've nowhere near the influence that Cody does. I do love Cody's work. I've been watching his stuff for a long time. And this is my just thoughts, not criticism at all of his ideas of switching, but just my thoughts on the general subject. Now, in his video, he brings up a lot of different points, how combat gets repetitive, how there's an optimization to doing things, how there's preset ways that his players are always going back to that remind him of rotations in an MMO, similar to Star Wars The Old Republic, which is a game I actually like, but it's an MMO and I want my rotations to stay in my MMOs. He says his players are getting bored. He says that people aren't enjoying the game, and he recently TPK'd a party, which he looks at as a bad thing and I look at as progress, but that's for a different video on a different day. I don't necessarily think the problem with any of those things has to do with the game systems. Now, as a min-maxer myself, I can tell you, when given the opportunity, players will optimize the fun out of a game. What do I mean by that? Well, there are certain people out there, myself included, who enjoy making strong characters. I don't necessarily think that that alone is a bad thing. RPGs, Dungeons & Dragons in particular, goes back to historical war games. And in those games, it was about making the best forces and then playing them in the best possible way to beat your opponent. Now, obviously, this is different in D&D. There's no opponent, I guess, unless you consider the Dungeon Master to be one. There's no opponent to beat. There's no big, prize at the end for yourself. I mean, obviously for your character, but there's nothing to win here, really. So why do we optimize? I think that it just goes back to wanting to be good at things, and there's nothing wrong with that, and I love it when I have a min-maxer at my table, because they're usually a great asset for the Dungeon Master. If the player is just interested in min-maxing their character, this can lead to problems. Normally, for characters, there's no reason for them to take a feat like Cook or Chef or whatever it's called in Tasha's over a feat like Crusher or Slasher or Piercer, which is going to up their damage output. I'm sure we're going to see a ton of great Weapon Master fighters with a Glaive and Slasher and Polearm Master that are just out there wrecking things in combat, just like we see Hexagon, since we've had Xanathar's Guide to Everything. Just like we have the Gloomstalker Assassin Battle Master Fighter build, just like we have the Infinite Healing Divine Soul Celestial Warlock Life Cleric build. There will always be ways to min-max the game, and those are examples from 5th edition D&D, not Pathfinder. A lot of this goes back to the design systems, like he was talking about with the 3 actions that you can take in Pathfinder. D&D has a similar problem with its bonus action. Bonus actions are probably my least favorite thing about 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. If you're not using your bonus action, you're not optimizing your character, which leads to very specific builds. This is the reason why Crossbow Expert is always better than a Longbow. This is the reason why dual wielding will outpace things at lower levels, but then quickly get replaced by whoever grabbed Polearm Master to go and whack people with -5 to hit and +10 to damage with their Great Weapon Master that they also took. When given the chance, players will optimize the fun out of a game, and you will have to accept that. You need to talk to your players about optimization and what exactly is happening, what's frustrating you as a Dungeon Master, what's frustrating them. Normally, it can be resolved fairly easily. Like I said before, having these people at your table that know the rules so well, I generally consider to be a boon to the Dungeon Master. So challenge them. Now that you've made these characters that are incredible, you've made these incredibly high-level wrecking machines of death who can go and kill Acererak and take all of his stuff, now roleplay them. Make an interesting story. Do all the things outside of combat that you should be doing to be an interesting human being. However, let's be real here. That might work, but RPGs based off of D&D are about kicking down doors and killing monsters. So what is the solution for a bunch of people who want to go and kick down doors and kill monsters in an optimized way without getting bored? I don't think the answer here is switching from Pathfinder 2nd Edition to D&D 5th Edition. I don't think there's going to be enough of a change to keep everybody interested when they're just going to go back to doing the same exact things. Your druid will probably, instead of turning into dinosaurs, is going to turn into elementals. Your swashbuckler is going to do the same exact thing, only it's probably going to grab a feat like mobile or dual wielder to increase its damage output and overall battlefield usefulness. Your fighter is still going to hit something with a sword, then it's going to hit it again with a sword, then it's going to hit it again with a sword, then it's going to axe and search, it's going to hit it again with a sword, it's going to hit it again with a sword, and then it's going to hit it again with a sword. Now, obviously, there is a great deal of hyperbole here. There are very versatile ways to play the game. There are classes like Bard and Cleric and Bladesinger, which can do a ton of different things in combat and usually do a ton of different things in combat. Your druid can run around and cast different spells instead of turning into animals. Your fighter can do other fighter things. Boy, fighters kind of really get boned on the whole we can do a lot of different things. Regardless, though, there are interesting ways to play the game. Talk to your players and make sure that you're all on the same page about what went wrong. Obviously, Cody's a great GM, and I'm sure that he's done this. And that when they go to play D&D 5th edition, even though I don't think mechanically there will be a big change other than the fact that it's a slightly easier system, I'm sure they will be able to resolve their issues. And I do understand his logic for switching systems. If you're going to have optimizers optimizing a system, you might as well be playing in the easier system to understand, because that will allow you to get through combat at least hopefully a little bit faster and move on with the other parts of the game that we find interesting. As GMs, I'm sure, as you've noticed on this channel, I do like talking about combat because this game is about kicking down doors and killing monsters. So in addition to doing all the things you've talked about in previous videos, making scary bad guys, making bad guys that interact with the PCs in different ways, making there be terrifying surroundings around a bad guy, we can do other things to make the actual fight itself more interesting. Aside from giving things more abilities, more actions, more things that they can do. Just doesn't have to be a specific thing, just a thing that makes this bad guy different than all the other bad guys. We can have more interesting fights, and we can make the environment around the characters cool. The fighter maybe learns that he can tear down the wall to bring it down on the bad guys. Maybe the druid can channel energy through the environment that makes it interact in different ways. Now, obviously, this is more work for the dungeon master, but it will make for a more interesting game. More so than the combat, what worries me about the future of RPGs in general is the fact that we are moving so far away from the original game, I don't know how recognizable it'll be in a couple of years. I learned off of OSR Dungeons & Dragons from my uncle's original box set with the 3 little books. Those games were brutal. They were grindy. And characters were defined by the choices that the players made for the characters. Not in an optimization way, but the way you actually played the characters. Now, this is not a criticism of D&D 5th edition. This is not a criticism of Pathfinder 2nd edition. Those games are the way they are because they're what the people want. Critical Role has done fantastic things for the community that we're playing in, but it has led to some pretty substantial changes in the game. Whether that be good or bad, I'll let you decide, but now it's story time. Back in the dawn of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, I revisited one of my favorite stories with my friends, The Rod of the Seven Parts. This is the first campaign that I ran, which I really considered to be a success. While we aren't finished with it yet, and the frequency of our meetings for it has dwindled down, we still do get together for what is essentially epic level one-shots where our characters go and do awesome things. Recently, we were discussing when we were going to get together to play again, and one of our friends who hasn't played in this campaign asked if he could come and join us. So of course I said yes, because, the more players, the better. However, when we were talking about his character, something strange occurred to me. We were talking about what he wanted to play. He was saying, yeah, I think I'm going to make this, what are those things? They walk around on 2 legs. They're like leprechauns. But he wanted to make a satyr artificer with a whole bunch of wacky stuff that he can do and fly around and be a superhero. That was remarkably different than anything else this party had ever seen before. The most exotic thing in the group was an Aasimar cleric. What occurred to me was that his character, when we were talking about it, there was nothing wrong with it. But his character was only interesting because of what it was from a gaming perspective. There was nothing unique about it. There was nothing special about it. It was an artificer, little furry guy who enjoyed running around and tinkering with stuff. And that's what made it interesting. The characters in the camp... Now, this isn't a criticism of him. This isn't a criticism of the character. It's just a general reflection on where we've come in this game. When we started this game, the most exotic thing our party had was probably a tie between a draconic ancestry half-elf sorcerer and a wood elf ranger. That was it. Now, it's not saying that that way of playing is better, but it forced... I don't know if it forced everyone or if that was just the mindset we were in, but they just made interesting characters for me to GM for. Ulfgar Frostbeard, the barbarian, wasn't interesting because he was a dwarf barbarian, because we've all seen that 1,000 times before. He was interesting because he was a character who suffered a great tragedy, but then used his conviction and his violence to be there for his friends and ultimately to save his people. Joseph Marks wasn't interesting because he was an Eldritch Knight fighter. He was interesting because he was an ex-con on the run from a previous life who was repenting for the sins that he had committed, and over the course of the campaign made a great impact on the world that he was playing in. I'm sorry, Silent, I don't know your last name, or at least I can't pronounce it because it's Elvish. Silent wasn't interesting because he was a Wood Elf Ranger. Silent was interesting because he was this morally ambiguous character who at first was only interested in lining his own pockets, but over time changed into someone who was there for his friends. Val wasn't interesting because she was a Draconic Ancestry sorcerer. She was interesting because she pursued her lineage with a fervor that I've never seen in a character before, and had probably the most evolved version of an amnesia, don't know my parents' backstory that I've ever seen, and that was a joy to work out with them. There's nothing wrong with where we're going in D&D, and if that's the game that you all want to be playing, I think you should, because this channel is about playing games for everybody, and everybody should be enjoying the games that they're in. But we are heading towards a world where all of our characters are vaguely similar. The new lineage system in Tasha's makes it so everybody can be a 7-foot-tall, furry, Marvel superhero ready to run into action with their Marvel circus carnival of pets and just go and take everybody down with little repercussions for their actions. And this is hard to get around as a dungeon master unless we're going to drastically change the game that we're playing in, which is an option. There are tons of other systems out there. There are tons of mods to 5th edition. You can play D&D 5e hardcore mode, which is going to make it a hell of a lot harder for your players to just take down every bad guy. You can play the game I'm currently excited about, Lamentations of the Flame Princess, which is grim, dark, gritty, gory, slightly inappropriate Dungeons and Dragons with tons of darkness and no healing powers, or very limited healing powers, and no reviving dead characters. You can play any of the other games. You can play Shadow of the Demon Lord. You can play Five Torches Deep. You can play RuneQuest. Any of these other systems that are, at this point, closer to the original OSR D&D. Not saying that that's better, but I'm just saying that that's an option that we have to get away from this path optimization and singularity of everybody being the same. Now, I think it's important to remember that less can be more when we're playing role-playing games, and I've probably reiterated this point a lot at this point in the video, but it's something I think is incredibly important to remember. Tasha's Cauldron of Everything is a great book. Xanathar's Guides are great books. I like what they did for the game. I love what they've done for Dungeon Masters with traps and puzzles, because I always have a difficult time figuring that stuff out. However, the uniqueness of everything has pushed us to a point where if everybody is so unique, if everybody has all these pets, if everybody can have the same ability scores, which I know mathematically doesn't make a difference over the course of your character, but to me makes a feeling difference, then we're going to get to a point where everybody's so unique that nobody's special at all. Instead of making a character that is interesting because it is a certain race or it is a certain class, we can make characters that are interesting off of the 7 core classes in Lamentations of the Flame Princess, which are interesting because they forge a backstory in the trenches of a dungeon, fighting side by side with their friends against inescapable horrors. I think we also have options like class-agnostic systems where they're skill-based. Call of Cthulhu is my favorite role-playing game system, and if I could find a fantasy game that could replicate that perfectly, I would be so happy. RuneQuest is an example of this, although those who stray away from magic runes and stuff are significantly weaker than those with combat magic, so there's still optimization there. But systems without classes can lead to other interesting ideas. Personally, for myself, I know I'm looking forward to in the future starting a game where we get back to the grittiness of old D&D, where death is around every corner, where characters forge relationships with other people because of their actions, where players need to think intelligently for their characters, not use their stats and background as an excuse to not have to do those things. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Now, obviously, this was not a criticism of Cody or anybody else in the D&D community. Who am I to even do that? I have, 30 of you on a good day that watch these videos? But these are just my thoughts and something I wanted to put out there after I watched Cody's video a month too late. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you liked it, like, comment, subscribe. If you didn't, dislike it, comment, and subscribe so you can come back and tell me what I've done wrong. You can come and check out our live streams on Twitch and YouTube from 6 to 9 p.m. every Friday for D&D, and from 7 to 10 p.m. every Wednesday for Call of Cthulhu. Until I see you there, which I hope I do, don't forget to have fun and roll some dice.